If you would like to support the podcast, you can click the Buy Us a Coffee link on our show notes or on our website. Your support helps us keep the podcast going, and we appreciate each of our listeners so much.
You can also rate and review us on Apple and Spotify, follow us on social media, and don't forget to tell your friends and family about us. I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is
Hard Times and True Crimes.
Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Way back when, folks would call it the Twin City because of its dual heritage, the early towns of Winston and Salem. Salem was settled in 1753, and the Moravian Church settled there, and in 1849, the Salem congregation sold some of its land to Forsyth County as a county seat. It was called Salem until 2 years later when it was renamed Winston, after Revolutionary War hero Joseph Winston. Eventually, the North Carolina Railroad and growth of the tobacco companies caused expansion in both cities. The United States Post Office began referring to the two cities as one, and by 1889, there was a Winston-Salem post office branch. And the mid to late 1900s were a time of great growth for Winston-Salem, with many notable companies getting their start there. Hanes brand got its start there manufacturing textiles, and the Bennett Bottling Company started there in 1906. Wachovia Bank and Trust, T.W. Garner Foods, the maker of Texas Pete, Krispy Kreme, Piedmont Airlines. But perhaps one of the most lucrative businesses to get its start in Winston-Salem is the RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company, founded in 1875. And the company saw great success with its branding of Prince Albert pipe tobacco in 1907, and then again in 1913 when it began making Camel cigarettes. And this is the same Reynolds family that you'll hear about today.
Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Well, we're not drinking anything today.
Nope.
Mainly because we're just meeting midday. But for my story today, Darlene, I started to bring us a pack of cigarettes.
Oh, really?
Some Camel cigarettes.
Haven't smoked in a while.
We were going to sit and smoke us a Camel. I'm kidding. I'm not a smoker. That's all a joke. Do you remember before we did our first podcast that we went to Madison and we stopped at this general store? And we talked to this young man about getting ready to start a podcast.
Yes,
and
he was so nice.
He was super nice. I wish I could remember his name. He was telling us all kinds of stories, historical stories.
He was like excited
He was very excited. And he was like, oh, have you heard this one? Have you done this one? And one of the ones he brought up was the one I'm going to cover today.
Oh, good.
And I had never heard of it before. But just recently, I was able to take a tour of the Reynolds House in Winston-Salem.
Okay.
And there was an exhibit there about this story.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to go there, by the way.
You need to go. It was a really good tour.
That's awesome.
And I'll tell you a little bit more about it as we get into the story.
Okay.
So, Richard Joshua Reynolds, also known as RJ, was the son of a tobacco farmer in Virginia. He moved to Winston, North Carolina in 1874 to start his own tobacco company. By February of 1899, he had chartered the RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company as a corporation with his brother William Neal and his bookkeeper Henry Rome. RJ held 75% ownership, and the other two split the remaining. And at this point, RJ's net worth was actually already around $200,000
Wow.
by this point back. And that was in, 1890s. At age 55, with a thriving business, he was one of the most eligible bachelors in Winston.
I bet he was. And he had never been married?
Never married
Wow.
at that point. But he was soon taken off the market in 1905 when he married Catherine Smith in Mount Airy, North Carolina. She was 30 years his junior, so she was
In
only
her 20s.
Yep, only 25.
Okay.
And she was his first cousin once removed.
Okay.
Yeah, her father was his first cousin. Therefore, he had known Catherine since she was a young girl. As an adult, she had gone to work at his company as a secretary.
I don't know if that's sweet or creepy.
I know, in these day and times, it seems a little creepy, but I'll
Yeah.
tell you a little bit more about them.
Back then, it was, I think, pretty
Common.
It was normal. Yeah.
I think it was definitely more accepted.
Yeah.
There is the story that while working there, she won $1,000 at a company-sponsored contest. Later, after they were married, he often joked that he had to marry her to get his money back. Well, despite the age difference, it is actually said they had a good relationship. He once wrote her that he was glad he had waited so long to marry.
Oh,
Yeah, it's sweet, isn't it?
that is sweet.
And he would actually ask her advice on business matters. She wasn't just another pretty face. He really respected her opinion and included her in his, business talks and that kind of thing.
That says a lot about him, too, I think, because she was a lot younger than him, and he really probably could have dismissed her.
Absolutely. And, she's a
Says a lot about
woman. And
her.
so a lot of
Yeah.
times, women aren't supposed to be meddle in the business, let the man handle it. But he really respected her opinion. So I think that does say a lot about his character.
Yeah. And it says a lot about her because she was probably really smart for
Yes.
him to...
Well, you're going to find out how smart.
Okay.
The business took off in 1913 when RJ had the idea to package cigarettes. Now, before this, most people would just roll their own cigarettes, right?
Yep.
He would use Turkish tobacco for the flavor, and he dubbed his cigarette the Camel.
Okay. Well, I used to smoke Camel Wides.
Oh, okay.
Back
So,
in.
see, I should have brought a pack. No, I don't want to get you started back on a bad habit. He then undercut his competitors on the price, and so within the year, he had sold 425 million packs of cigarettes.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
So he was very successful.
Very successful. Then in 1917, the Reynolds Company bought 84 acres of property in Winston-Salem, and they built 180 houses. The company then sold those houses to its workers at cost.
I love that.
And the development was called Reynoldstown. And this was all part of a vision that RJ and Catherine had to build like this model community, this model farming village where their employees could live and send their children to school and do business.
Why don't we do stuff like that still
I really
today?
wish we did.
Me too.
The couple did have 4 children together between 1906 and 1911.
Okay.
They
so
had-
even though he was older, they...
Yes, they got busy right away.
Yes.
So they had Richard Jr., they called him Dick, Mary, Nancy, and then their youngest son, Smith, which was named, after Catherine's maiden name. While Catherine was building her family, she was also building a future for the kids in the form of a country estate. It took 8 years to complete, but when it did, her vision had come to fruition. The house, which they called a bungalow, was the Queen Anne style, with a low sweeping roof over wide porches, thick Tuscan columns, and there were over 26,000 square feet of space within
gosh.
within the 2 stories. It also had an attic and a basement in addition to that.
And they had plenty of room.
Plenty of room. The house had 60 rooms and 8 bedrooms. And many of the bedrooms would have like an adjacent bathroom and what they called a sleeping porch. This was during a time where fresh air was really touted as good for your health.
Sure.
So you could go sleep outside on the sleeping porch that was just off of your bedroom.
I love that too, actually.
The grounds had formal gardens, tennis courts, and a pool. And then surrounding the house, there was a lake named Lake Catherine. And they had a school, a church. And then they hired a preacher-teacher.
Okay.
And he would teach the kids, but he also taught some of the adults as well.
Okay, now is this is not the community that they built. This is like an extra
This is their personal home that extends out into their village, their community that they're building.
Okay, gotcha.
So they're trying to provide for their employees.
Right. So that's like the big house.
That's the big house.
Okay.
And it was a big house.
Yes.
And that's what I said was called Reynolds House, which is where I visited. Today, you can still visit it. It's an art museum. The exhibit that they had there was about the story I'm going to tell you today. And this is the first time they've actually spoken publicly about it.
Really?
Yes.
That's so cool that you got to go. And
very cool, because the exhibit was over at the end of December. And I just found out about it like 2 to 3 days before that. I was given tickets.
Wow.
So I was so glad that I got to experience it. But you can still go to the house, and you should.
Yes.
By the time they moved into the estate, RJ had already been battling pancreatic cancer for some time. So within 6 months of moving in, RJ lost his battle, and he passed away in 1918, leaving Catherine a widow with 4 young children.
Right, and she would have still been pretty young.
After about a year of mourning, Catherine began to take an interest in their school principal.
Oh, the preacher teacher?
Well, I don't think it was the same guy. I think this was just the principal of the school. His name was J. Edward Johnston. They had a lot in common, although now at this point, he's 13 years her junior.
Okay, so it's reversed.
It is reversed. It's funny, too, to think that she married someone 30 years older and then someone 13 years younger. She married him in 1921. While her daughters were pretty happy with the marriage, her eldest son, Dick, he was now 15, and he wasn't that thrilled about it. He did not even attend the wedding.
I feel like that's common.
Well, I can see why the eldest son would feel like, you're trying to replace my father.
Right.
I could understand it. So he went to live with his uncle, William Neal. And Catherine's youngest son, Zachary Smith, he was 10 at the time, and he was a ring bearer in the wedding. Now, Catherine became pregnant again at the age of 44. So she was in her early 40s when she married Johnston.
Okay.
She had a lot of complications with her other pregnancies, and this one was no different. Unfortunately, the baby daughter, Lola, died within just a couple of days of being born.
Oh.
They told Catherine then that they did not advise her to become pregnant again, but she wanted to give her new husband a child.
Right. Especially probably being older and him being so much. Yeah, I get it.
I can get that too. So shortly after, she did become pregnant once more. And this time, her health just didn't hold up. And she did give birth to a son in 1924, J. Edward Jr., but she died shortly after that birth.
Oh.
Now these 4 children, their father's gone and their mother's gone.
Right. And now, was she a pretty, good, attentive mom?
She was. At the exhibit at Reynolds House, there were several things about her, but for all accounts, she was just a very good mother to those kids.
Okay.
Edward Johnston did take his son, Edward Jr., and they actually moved to Baltimore. But the young Reynolds children, the heirs, they were taken care of by their uncle, William Neal Reynolds.
Okay.
And for a good part of the time, they attended boarding schools, and they had people on staff there at the house that cared for them.
And I think going away to school, that was common back then for sure.
Yeah, and they would have done that regardless of whether their mother was home. So let's turn our focus now to the youngest of the Reynolds heirs, Z. Smith Reynolds. He attended boarding schools while he was young, and while there, he was nicknamed Camel, which I thought was a cute nickname. He also enjoyed the perks that wealth affords, such as, trips to Europe and that sort of thing. But, he was still motherless and fatherless, and so I'm sure he still had to grow up quickly in a sense.
Sure.
And I'm sure that did affect him. At one point, though, he did write about getting drunk during a trip to Switzerland, and that was when he was just 13 years old.
Okay. I'm sure, though, that people probably gave him his way. Like,
yes.
If he wanted to drink, he could drink. And
actually, there have been people that worked there and that kind of thing who have said that was the case, that those kids were, they're rich kids. They are coddled and spoiled a little bit. And they didn't necessarily mean in a bad way.
Sure.
Just that they do have the perks that wealth affords and get in their way.
And probably especially him, because I bet everybody kind of felt sorry for him.
And he was the youngest.
Sure, yeah.
He dropped out of school before his senior year. He was only around the age of 15, so I don't know if he was just ahead in school at that point, but it was just before he would have been a senior. But that was because he had developed an interest in aviation. He went to work for his brother Dick at Reynolds Aviation. By the age of 16, he had his private pilot's license, personally signed by Orville Wright.
Really?
It was. In fact, he was the nation's youngest licensed transport pilot at that time.
That is cool. So
Yeah.
he must have been pretty smart.
He was. And he was a really good aviator. He actually became a stunt pilot, and he competed among the likes of Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. It says he knew them well enough that he sometimes borrowed their planes.
Okay. Wow. That's
So,
cool.
which again, that comes along with his name and his family
Sure.
money, but that's pretty cool that this 16-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So now his nickname is no longer Camel, but he's known as Daredevil Smith. Shortly after Smith turned 18, he married Anne Cannon. She was the heiress of Cannon Mills out of Concord.
Okay.
It's like a textile company. and that
Textiles
kind-
were big in North Carolina
Mhm.
back then.
And they still are,
Yeah,
really. Not as
yeah.
much so as they once were, but still pretty much. So she had become pregnant. So this is what we call a shotgun wedding. You know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time in North Carolina, you couldn't actually get married before age 21 without the consent of a guardian.
Oh.
But she was pregnant. Her father said, you are going to
Sure.
marry her. And so someone signed and gave him consent to marry.
Right.
And young marriages and young people come with a lot of fierce, passionate feelings in a lot of regards. You can probably vouch for that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you love fiercely and you fight
fiercely.
Once during a party, Smith and Anne got into such an explosive fight that Smith slapped her twice and sent her to bed. Can you imagine?
Oh, my goodness. No. I
That wouldn't
can't.
fly these days.
No, it would not.
So it's not surprising their relationship went into a tailspin, crashed and burned fairly quickly.
I'm sure.
They did separate, and in 1930, their daughter, whom they also named Anne, was born. For some reason, she was sent to Blowing Rock to live with her grandparents. And it was during this time of separation that Smith was introduced to Broadway star Libby Holman, and he was immediately infatuated.
She was a singer?
She was.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, and then we'll talk about how they met. So who was Libby Holman? Well, she was born Elizabeth Holzman on May 23rd, 1904 in Cincinnati. The Z in her last name was dropped during the war when Cincinnati was extremely German conscious, according to one newspaper. So the spelling kind of gave away her Jewish heritage.
Isn't that surprising?
Yes, but this was actually before World War II. It
Okay.
was like this was
Yeah.
World War I we're talking about.
Okay.
It's surprising in one way, but in another way, it's like,
Yeah,
well, I
not
guess
so
it's
much.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah. She went to New York by 1924. She actually also was pretty smart. She had graduated college from Columbia at age 18, and she had graduated high school 2 years earlier than the normal term.
Mm-hmm.
She missed enrollment to law school by just a little bit because she was just a little bit too young. She ended up taking some musical theater classes and found her
Yeah.
niche. Yeah. So she actually ended up going to Broadway within just a few years, and
Wow.
she was becoming a star. She sang torch songs. Do you know what those are?
No.
That's like when a woman holds a torch for an unobtainable lover and they sing these
Gotcha.
songs. And a lot of people who heard her sing, they assumed that she was black because she had this sultry, husky voice. And she actually welcomed the people believing that about her. There's one myth that she had an operation that caused that huskiness in her voice. But friends and neighbors said that wasn't true. She always had that. You know, Smith had his nickname Camel and Daredevil Smith. Well, Libby had her own nickname. She was called the Statue of Libby because she had the smokiest torch on Broadway.
Wow. Okay. That was probably like a fashionable term.
Fame did suit her, and she was very fashionable, just as you said. It was reported that she had a home on Long Island, a Great Dane. She carried a lorgnette. It's a pair of glasses with just one long handle on the side that you hold up. Kind of like opera glasses, but you don't wear them just for the opera. You know, it was just one of those fashion accessories of the day.
And what year was this?
This was
Like around.
1924.
Okay. That's kind of whenever bad girls, I feel like, were becoming into
Those
were coming
flappers.
into fashion. Yeah.
Yep. She probably was a very much a symbol of that during that time.
I'm thinking of like Ella Fitzgerald.
Yes. And again, that sultry voice. Love that. After Libby hit the limelight on Broadway, she was sometimes earning $4,000 a week.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Back then. She's performing in this show. It's called The Little Show. And now this is 1930. And this was when she was introduced to Smith by a mutual friend, Dwight Deere Wyman. He was a silent screen actor, but he was also the great-grandson of John Deere.
Okay.
The John Deere.
Wow.
Now, Smith was still married to Anne at this time. He was only 19 years old.
Oh my gosh. And he's had a baby, been married.
And separated.
Lived a whole life. He's an aviator.
Yes. And their daughter, Anne, had been born that year in August. Libby was about 7.5 years older than him. And now you've got this Broadway star. She's hanging with this sophisticated set. And then you have this young, adventure-seeking 19-year-old kid. But he's, he's kind of shy. He's from North Carolina. And she was just more worldly wise than he.
Right.
Right? But he would follow her around from place to place, watching her perform every night and hang out with her and her friends. And it said that he would try to win her friends over and fit in with them, but he never did quite find his place.
Gotcha. They didn't really like him?
I don't want to say they didn't like him, but they didn't think they were a good fit.
Okay.
And they may not have been a good fit.
Right.
But in a whirlwind, they decided to marry before long. Smith was still married, and Libby kept saying, I can't marry you. You're married.
Sure.
And so he was determined he needed to get his divorce. Well, however, again, just like in North Carolina, when you could not get married before 21, you couldn't get a divorce either without signature of somebody because you're not 21.
Do you know how his wife felt about him seeing Libby? Or
she was engaged to somebody very shortly after.
Okay.
So
she didn't care.
Yeah, I don't know if she didn't care, but she moved on pretty easily.
Did she get? I'm so sorry,
No.
but do you know if she got money?
I'll keep that until the end.
Okay.
Since he was not yet 21, he flew his wife Anne to Reno to get a divorce there, so it would be legal. And 6 days later, he flew Libby to Michigan, and they were married on November 29th, 1931. When they got married under their given first names. Hers was Elizabeth, and his was Zachary, because they were trying to keep it kind of private and under wraps.
Okay.
The media got hold of it anyway and started printing headlines that they had gone to Honolulu. They had married in Hawaii and gone to Honolulu, but none of that was true. They were married in Michigan, and they did take a honeymoon trip after her show was over to the Orient.
So the media was not trustworthy then either.
No. Now, keep in mind, she's actually making more money than him at this point. Although he's very rich, he's not going to inherit anything until he's 28 years old.
Okay.
And he's only 20.
Living off of like
an allowance.
Yeah.
Yes. So she's got more money than him. So their plan was, when they came back from their honeymoon, she had a tour to finish, and she had to finish her contract. And then he actually had this aviation trip planned. He was going to try to fly around the globe in record time. He had tried it once before, but he had to give it up within 270 miles of finishing because he had difficulties with his plane.
Oh, wow.
So he wanted to try that again. And that was in the spring, that's what his plan was. And she was going to take some classes at college in New York.
Okay.
He was actually going to take a few classes first on aviation before he went to.
Okay.
When her tour was complete, before they went to New York, they moved to Reynolds House in 1932. And we're staying there for a little short while before classes started.
Was it just them? Like, were any of his siblings there?
None of the siblings were living there. They of course, had staff. They had a superintendent. They had a groundskeeper and night watchman, but it was just them in the house. And that brings us up to what happened on a fateful night in 1932.
All right.
Smith and Libby had been living at Reynolds House for a little more than a month, and they decided to host a birthday party for their friend C.G. Hill. It was his 21st birthday. They invited some of their friends for a July the 5th party. And other than Smith and Libby, there were approximately 9 other guests, various friends of both of them. Some were house guests who were staying with them on the property, and others just came for the evening. The guests arrived in the evening around 6:30 to 7, and they were served a round of highballs at the reception room before they all headed down to the boathouse at the lake on the property. Down at the boathouse, they ate barbecue sandwiches and beer, homebrewed corn liquor, and they just sat around, talked, and cut up and played.
And got drunk.
Well, Libby and one guest in particular were getting drunk. It was Babe Vaught. She was known as Babe. Her name was Mary, but they were kind of drinking a little more than others. One source said that Libby started a drinking contest.
Okay.
And at one point, she stands up on this wall and she's kind of dancing around and she stumbles a little bit. And Smith didn't seem to be caring for that too much. He had a look on his face that he was not really happy about that. And that was one of the household maids, actually, is the one who said that later.
Okay.
Well, at one point, Libby puts her arm around the shoulder of Ab Walker. Now, Ab, well, his name is Albert Walker. He was Smith's childhood best friend, had grown up with him, and Smith had recently hired him as his personal assistant, to help him with this trip he's planning.
Okay.
So it's his best friend and his assistant now.
All right.
So at one point, Libby puts her arm around Ab's shoulders and leans in close, and she whispers to him, "I don't think Smith loves me." And she said it in a tight way. Do you know what that means?
No, was it like flirtatious?
No, drunk.
So
Tight.
she was getting drunk.
She was getting tight. Yes. Okay. Smith actually saw that exchange, and he confronted Libby about it. So a little while later, Smith and Libby go back over to Ab, and Libby asks, "Did I kiss you?" And Ab replied, "Of course not." So when they leaned in, when she leaned in, I guess Smith thought that she had kissed him. Well, the party, nothing's done at that point, but the party, they meander on down to the lake. They start pairing off. Some of the couples get in canoes. Some of the other party guests get in some boats, and they're out on the lake enjoying themselves that evening until...
That's kind of dangerous, I feel like. Drinking and canoeing.
And probably didn't have on any life jackets.
Right.
Luckily for them, nothing happened out on the lake. As the evening starts winding down, some of the guests, they start heading back up to the big house. And Ab, he goes out to the lake, gets in a canoe, and rounds everybody up and says, "Hey, when you're done, come on back up to the house." They go up there. They're listening to some Benny Goodman on the Victrola.
I feel like I can just hear it.
Except Libby, she was not with them for some time. And no one had seen her in a while, like for an hour or two. Ab asked where Libby was, since she never came back up to the house, and Smith said she must be roaming around outside lost.
He was mad at her, it sounds like.
Probably
like
a little
didn't care
miffed.
where she was.
Maybe a little miffed about that, yeah. Ab and Smith, they go off into the pantry to talk, and Ab offers to go look for Libby, and Smith declined, saying, "If she's not back when the guests leave, I'll go look for her." And at this time, he also said to Ab, "Hey, I just want to get it straight. I wasn't accusing you of anything." Talking about that little altercation they had down at the...
about the kiss.
Ab said there wasn't anything. And Smith said, "I saw what happened."
So he was believing it. I mean, it does a little bit sound like she's being flirtatious. But maybe she just has a flirtatious personality.
I do think she did have that. One resource I read of a reporter who had talked to people from her hometown, there were several girls there that didn't like her because of her flirtatious personality.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I feel like when I was young, I thought I was friendly, but my husband thought I was flirtatious. And he trained me really quick.
That's
in the ways of married people.
Well, she hadn't been trained yet. Plus, she's 7.5 years older. She probably doesn't want to be trained.
Right.
Now, Ab must have really been concerned about her where she was, because at one point he went back down to the boathouse. Miss Vaught, the other drunk person, the other drunk lady there, she had left her shoes down at the boathouse, so he went to get them for her. But while he was out, he was looking for Libby, and he still didn't see her.
So I wonder if there was a little something between them.
Well, keep that in mind, and you'll have to see.
He's very concerned about her.
He was concerned.
Okay.
Mrs. Vaught, or Babe, she was staying overnight at the house, so she went ahead and turned in. Libby's acting coach, Blanche Yurka, she was also an overnight guest who had been staying there for several days, and she turned in as well. And all the other guests, they all kind of started trickling out, around 11:30. Sometime after that, Smith, Ab, and the night watchman were outside, and they heard a noise. And Ab said he thought it must be Mrs. Reynolds. So he ran around to the front of the house in the direction of the lake. Well, he didn't see anybody. So he runs back around to the night watchman and, ask him, well, who is that? Do you hear anything? They don't see anybody. And by the time they get back to the front of the house, there on the porch are Libby and Smith talking. So she had turned up.
So do we know where she was?
She was just, I guess, roaming around outside drunk. Nobody knows. I mean, she just showed up.
Okay.
She just showed up. After all the guests had left, except for one, Libby goes up to her room to turn in. And Smith and Ab, they stay downstairs and talk for a little bit, and they're seeing off another guest. Jim's leaving. And Smith goes upstairs, and he tells Ab on the way up, don't bother leaving a door unlocked for me. And he tossed him his wallet, and he said, here, you can have this. And Ab, he kind of took that wallet down in the seat cushions. And he says that he thought Smith just meant he hadn't really paid him yet that week, and he was saying, you can have what's in here, like this is yours.
Okay.
I know, it was kind of odd.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is a little odd thing. But he says, don't leave it on, you don't have to worry about leaving the door unlocked. I'm going up, and when I come back down, I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back. So he continued locking up the house. He had kind of been doing that for several nights. He was also a house guest staying over. He had his own room there that he stayed in. And so he typically locked up. So he kind of stayed down there locking up, waiting for Smith to come back down because he was going to try to talk him out of leaving. He was like a little bit concerned about that. And so he thought, well, I'm just going to kind of hang out here, lock up some stuff, and wait for him to come back. Suddenly, a shot rings out, a single shot. And Ab said he does remember thinking to himself, well, that wasn't loud enough to be a pistol shot. Then he heard Mrs. Yerka call to him from the balcony above that she had heard a hysterical voice or a scream or some kind of commotion. And immediately after that, Ab hears a scream. Libby comes running out of the bedroom and said, Smith shot himself.
Oh, my gosh.
Ab was already running up the stairs, and he met her at the top. He runs into the bedroom and out onto the sleeping porch, where he finds Smith laying across the bed, face forward, face down. Smith had blood running from his head onto the floor.
So he shot himself in the head?
In the head. Oh. Ab picked up the body. He and Libby started dragging him out of the room. And he said Ms. Yerka came and got the feet and helped them carry him out to the car.
So he was alive?
He was still alive.
Okay.
They put Smith in the back seat with Ms. Yerka, and Ab and Libby sit in the front seat, and they drive him to Baptist Hospital.
That's weird. I would think that one of them would want to be with him if he's...
Do you find that weird?
I find that very weird, actually, yeah. I feel like if my husband is dying in the back seat, I'm not sitting up front with his friend.
You know what? I think you're right. I hadn't really entertained that thought, but yeah I would have been in the back with him.
I'm going to be with my husband.
Okay, that's a good point. I don't know. I mean, that's very obvious now that you say it, but I've looked at so much information, that one little detail didn't really occur to me. They arrive at Baptist Hospital at about 1:10 a.m. Now, Ab, he's still in his bathing suit from the party because he had not even changed his clothes yet. Libby Reynolds, she's like in this like little negligee thing that she was wearing to bed. And Blanche Yerka, she did pull on like this little house coat thing over her night clothes. So none of them are really dressed for being in public.
Right.
Dr. Fred Haynes, a medical examiner, was called at home and he was told that Smith Reynolds had shot himself. He went to the hospital immediately. He was taken to the operating room. Smith actually held on for 4 hours.
Wow.
But at 5:25 a.m. on July 6th, he died from a bullet wound to the head.
Oh, he's so young.
So young.
Was he still 19?
He was 20.
20, okay.
Yeah, not even 21 yet. Several doctors were brought in to perform an autopsy during this time, like immediately afterwards. Now, at this time, Mrs. Reynolds, she's at the hospital hysterical. Some nurses go get her. They take her down from the 5th floor operating room to the 3rd floor, and they put her in this private room to try to calm her down. And she's still waiting for news of her husband's fate. She doesn't know yet that he died. This was in the hours between when they arrived at 1:10 to 5:25 that she's there. Okay. Her friend, Ms. Yerka, comes in there and gives her her house coat, puts that on her. And then Ab comes down to that room where Libby's at. And he asked everybody to leave the room so they could talk. One of the nurses, Nurse Jenkins, she said she goes out. She does hear Ab say, don't say anything. Then she goes out. She hears this commotion. She comes back into the room and she finds Ab and Libby on the floor. They had fallen off the bed.
Okay, that is
They were
weird.
on the floor in a tangle.
Oh, heck no.
She said Ab told her he had gotten nauseated. Now, let me just say this.
Uh-huh.
Libby's drunk.
Right.
Ab said he was not drunk that night. He had had very little to drink.
I would have said I was drunk if I had wound up on the floor with Libby.
Right. Now, several other people do say that they smelled alcohol on him and they thought he was under the influence of alcohol and maybe drunk. He said he wasn't, but then he said he got nauseated and that's why he fell on the floor.
Okay. Now, the only thing is I could see him being nauseated. Like, I might be nauseated too if my best friend was just, you know what I mean? Like the adrenaline of the whole situation. But still, I don't feel like I would have wound up in the floor with.
They're like tangled in the floor.
Yeah,
I mean, that is kind of weird. I agree with that. And then Nurse Jenkins said that she overheard Ab tell Libby, don't say anything. And then she heard Libby say, my baby, my baby. To which Ab says, what do you mean by that? And Libby replies, don't you know I'm going to have a baby?
Oh my gosh. And she's drunk?
She is drunk.
Was she really going to have a baby?
Well, we'll find out.
Okay.
The headlines in the papers the next day announced the suicide of Smith Reynolds. So
I'm wondering if it was a suicide.
And that is where we come to in this story. The physical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
The doctors and some of the caretakers of the property and law enforcement, they're all at different times of the morning going back to the house for different things.
Okay.
This is what they find. First of all, the doctors that did the autopsy said the bullet had entered Smith's head in the right temple and had exited a couple of inches behind his left ear.
Okay.
Traveling diagonally across the brain cavity, right to left. The left wound contained particles of brain tissue. That was the exit wound. As the bullet traveled through the brain and exited, it left brain tissue there. Smith had a slight powder burn where the bullet had entered, which suggested he was a little bit of a distance from the barrel to his head. It wasn't placed directly up against it because it wasn't a big powder burn. That could mean nothing. It could mean something.
Yeah. It's a little weird to hold it. I'm like doing the motion though still. Okay.
When I was researching this and I was reading through that physical evidence, Tim and I were standing up beside the bed. I was saying, no, hold your hand here. And I was laying on the bed. I mean, you should have seen us. It was
right. But isn't that a little bit of an awkward?
It is an awkward angle.
Okay.
And what adds more to that awkward angle and questionable is that the bullet exited the room. After it left his brain, it exited the room through a screen on the sleeping porch that was about 6.5 feet off of the floor, up high. And that angle just doesn't make sense if he was shot standing up. It didn't seem possible that it would have made an exit through that screen that high up if the bullet was angled down. That gave Forsyth County Sheriff Jay Scott a lot of doubts about the story he had been told.
Yeah.
Now, the angle would have made sense if he had been lying down and it had traveled directly up. Also, now this is weird to me. So the gun was not found in the room at first. A total of 3 searches took place before that gun mysteriously appeared on the rug right beside the bed just inside the door. A path that many people had traveled back and forth coming in and out of that room since it had happened. Some people even with flashlights looking around.
So
didn't see
were
it.
they looking for the gun?
At times they were and didn't see it.
Okay.
The superintendent of the estate, last name Wharton, he was the first one that did spot it. And he stated he had not seen that gun previously when he had gone into the room. And Dr. Fred Haynes also said he had not seen the gun in that spot when he had been in there that morning after the shooting.
So they're thinking somebody put it there later.
Yes.
Okay.
What I don't understand is why would anybody remove the gun? If he shot himself, why wouldn't you leave it there?
Yeah.
To me, that just doesn't make sense. What reason would anybody have to move the gun?
And it would just seem like you're just so frantic. You just move. You know what I mean? Like you would just move him. Like, yeah, like you said, why move the gun? Why take the time to...
Yeah, because if he had really shot himself, it would have fallen there and that's where you would have left it.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's not like you're going to be like,
Like, you're not trying to cover that up
Yeah.
and hide it. So that's a question I still have.
Yeah.
The gun was picked up and placed on the bedside table so it wouldn't be stepped on. When the sheriff arrived and he saw the gun on the table, he picked it up. It was a German Mauser. There were 7 cartridges left in the gun, and it held 8. So only one was missing. There was a smudged, bloody handprint on the bathroom door, and there was a towel hanging nearby with blood on it that suggested someone maybe had tried to clean the blood. But again, there's blood's to be expected in the room.
Yeah.
So I don't know that means anything.
Okay.
Of course, like if you're there and you're moving a body,
You're going to have blood.
yeah, and there's going to be smudges of it smeared. I don't think that that's questionable.
Right.
When Ab's room was searched, Libby's slippers were found beside the bed, and her sweater was found in his bathroom. At one point, investigators go with him up to his room because he finally had changed out of his bathing suit,
Right.
and they wanted to examine the bathing suit and the blood that had gotten on him. They wanted to go take a look.
Yeah.
When they go in there, before they can ask him about those slippers and the sweater, he all of a sudden says, "Oh, I should tell you, on the night that happened, Libby and Smith came into this room to talk before they went out and headed to the bedroom. They were in my room." And that was something he had not told them in his story before.
Okay.
Now, I will say this. Later, Libby did testify it was not uncommon for her and Smith to go in that room to talk. It was his boyhood bedroom, and he still kept his desk and his papers in there. And his globe for that trip he was planning was in there. And so she said it was plenty of times they would go in, they would lay on the bed and talk. She would leave her stuff around. She says that's not uncommon.
Yeah, I mean, but was there any evidence that Smith had been in there? Because I still find it odd that her robe and slippers were left in there.
It was a sweater in the bathroom and the slippers. But
Okay.
it does seem a little odd.
Yeah.
There's no evidence other than Ab's testimony that he saw them go in.
Okay.
So that's the evidence, just his word. In light of all of that evidence, and because the sheriff had his doubts about the story, 2 days after Smith's death, a coroner's jury was put together and an inquest into the matter was held at Reynolds House in the east bedroom where Smith had been shot on the sleeping porch. Every guest who had been at the party was questioned under oath, as well as the staff at Reynolds.
Okay.
Due to the suicide tale, the question of Smith's state of mind in the days leading up to this became a big issue at the inquest.
Sure.
Both Ab and Libby say Smith had been talking about suicide a lot.
Were those two the only ones saying that?
They were.
Okay.
At the questioning, Libby had claimed that he had an inferiority complex. Several other people were asked under questioning, had you noticed him having that? And they all said no.
And too, she could paint that picture if he was a little jealous, but maybe he had a reason to be a little jealous. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe not, but
I do. I know what you mean. There's more stuff to come.
Okay.
And it's either going to convince you that you're right, or maybe it'll cast a little doubt on what you're thinking.
Okay.
So I'm going to go first into what Ab said under questioning. Now, he was recalled. He was questioned 3 times during that inquest, and a lot of his story changed. It didn't change significantly, but little details changed.
Okay.
But I can account for the fact that he was obviously upset that night, probably running off of adrenaline, maybe drunk, definitely under the influence a little bit, probably in shock. So he's not going to tell, like, some details are going to be left out.
Yeah.
There were some that were just like the one about him, them going into the bedroom to talk. The fact that he didn't bring that up at first, that seems a little questionable. But other ones were just small details that you're like, well, I can understand why you would get that wrong.
And even with that, like, he may not have thought about it until he went in there and saw her slippers and was like, oh. But I don't know.
Well, he had not been back up to his room since he had gone earlier in the evening to change into his bathing suit.
Okay.
So he may not even have seen those because he had never gone to his room that night before bed. He had stayed downstairs.
Okay.
And then ended up going to the hospital and then coming in the next morning. So by the time he went back up there to change, he had not been to his room. So if something had been left, he wouldn't have known that.
Gotcha.
Under oath, Ab told about something that had happened a couple of days before this incident. He said that Smith had told him he was leaving on Sunday, July 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
That evening, he had said he was going to go stay in town and he was going to get his head examined the next morning. He said, I must be insane. He said, Libby keeps saying that I do these little things, but I don't remember doing them, and I think I must be crazy. I need my head examined. Libby had supposedly begged him not to leave, but he said he was going anyway. So he got Ab to take him into town, and they got a room at the Robert E. Lee Hotel. Ab said that Smith had told him earlier that day about his concerns about his and Libby's relationship, that he just didn't feel he could make Libby happy. And Ab says he stayed with him that night because he was worried about his state of mind then. And the next morning, Smith didn't end up going to see a doctor like he was supposed to. He just went to check on the plane and then went home.
So those two are the only ones
so far, yeah.
Okay.
Later, when Ab was telling the events to Smith's cousin-in-law, J.T. Barnes, he said, tell me what happened. He told him that Smith had intended on suicide that night that they had spent at the Robert E. Lee, and he had talked him out of it. At one point during the inquest, Ab claimed on the evening when Smith had tossed him that wallet and said, here, you can have this. Only at one time during the testimony did he say this, but he said that Smith also said to him, the trip is off, the trip around the world, the trip is off, I'm going to end it all. Later, Ab was questioned again about that, and he didn't remember saying that, and he didn't know why he would have said it.
Okay, yeah.
So it was those kinds of things in his testimony. He says he did not think Smith was jealous of Libby. He said he was just so afraid of losing her and their happiness that it was really just affecting him. This is a quote from Ab. He says, the truth of the matter is that Smith just thought too much of that woman.
Okay, yeah, but if she's like dancing up on the thing, I can just see it. Like, I can just see her dancing. Like, he's probably feeling like she's being flirtatious. And then she's whispering in his ear, I don't think Smith loves me. I mean, to me, that is flirtatious.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know how he could say he didn't think he was jealous.
But he says he doesn't think he's so much jealous of her being with other people, just that he's afraid he's going to lose her. That was where his jealousy was. So I see where you question that. And we'll talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about Libby. This is the interesting thing about Libby. She actually claimed she had no memory of what happened at all on that day. Not the day.
Oh, gosh.
Not
one of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not the day of the shooting or anything all the next day. So she testified under oath that she couldn't remember anything. When they asked her, well, have you ever lost your memory before? She said no, she had not, but she'd never had a shock before like that.
Wasn't she going to be a lawyer?
Yeah.
Okay, she probably knows what she's doing.
And she's an actress.
Exactly.
So she does say, though, there's one exception to not having any memory of it. And it's this flash of seeing Smith standing above her. She's in the bed, and he's standing beside the bed, kind of over her, and she sees this gun pointed to it. He's got a gun up to his head, and he calls her name, Lib. And then she heard a shot, and she doesn't see anything after that. She just has this feeling of Smitty being in her arms and feeling his blood kind of running over her.
How convenient.
Yeah, that's all she's got.
There's proof, like physical proof, though, that it did not happen like that.
Supposedly there is.
Okay.
I mean, that physical evidence, according to the authorities, would state otherwise.
Okay.
And it is awfully convenient for her because now any other questions, all she can say is, I don't remember.
Right.
She went on to describe his state of mind as saying, like, that he had this inferiority complex and that he was so worried she didn't love him. She said the day before the shooting, they had been in a group of people there at the house with some of their guests, and they were reading through a play. She was like reclined, and she moved around a little bit, and Smith got upset with her and said, you shrank from me. And she said, no, I didn't. I was just like moving around and adjusting. You shrank from me. I would never shrink from you. So they're having this little disagreement over who shrank from who. And she said he was accusing her of not loving him and that kind of thing. That actually was the incident that led to him going to that hotel that night.
Okay.
And remember, he did supposedly tell Smith that she says that I've done things and I haven't, and I must be going insane.
Yeah.
He does seem a little insecure to me. If
we believe them.
If they're telling the truth. She says that he imagined stuff like that a lot that wasn't true. She recounted the time on their honeymoon when they were returning on the boat from China. She said at 2 different times he actually put a gun to his head then. She said he always had a gun with him. He carried his gun always.
Okay, but again, this is her
It is.
saying all this.
It is. And she also says that in the short time that they were married, which was only 7 months, that he had actually put a gun to his head 7 or 8 times, twice on their honeymoon. And at one time, he even put a gun to her head.
Yeah, I don't know.
She said he would say, Libby, I can't make you happy. I'm taking your friends away from you, and I'm taking you away from the theater, and I just can't live up to your expectations of me. I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah, I'm going to have to hear somebody else say it besides Libby or the friend.
Well, when she was asked why he never acted like that in front of anyone else and just with her, she said no, it was just with me. And they said, well, if that was a mental issue, like how could he control it in front of other people?
Right.
She did continue to talk about how he was paranoid. He was terrified of kidnappers. That's one reason he always carried a gun. If you think about the Lindbergh kidnapping that we did the episode on back, I think it was episode 20, that happened in March of 1932, and this is July 1932.
There are actually a lot of kidnappings back then among rich families. So, I mean, he might have been paranoid about that.
And there had been threats made in his family. Okay. He had a little bit of a reason to be paranoid, for sure. So he always carried that gun, and he was always on the lookout and thinking that somebody was after him. He told her one time he was so afraid somebody was after him, he would put a dummy in his bed and sleep under his bed because people were threatening his life.
Now, is that just her saying that again?
That's her testimony. Then we get to this testimony from her. She also claimed that he struggled a little bit in the bedroom with some male virility problems. Obviously, he was really upset by that.
Okay.
I mean, you think about it, he's a 20-year-old kid, so I'm sure he was.
Especially if he's like a little intimidated by his older, much worldlier,
flirtatious wife.
Yes.
Well, she said that he told her, just go find you another man to have an affair with because I can't make you happy.
I don't believe that if he was that jealous over his friends.
So she says she tried to comfort him and assure him, I don't want anybody else. I want you. And she said she couldn't get that shaken.
To me, I just feel like she's trying to paint herself as this like accommodating, like sweet wife. And I do not have that.
You're not buying her story.
No.
Okay, this is where I'm going to say she actually did turn out to really be pregnant. So this did raise some questions about the paternity of the baby if Smith was having these virility problems. So in some people's mind, that was questionable. Mm-hmm. She asked him if he ever wanted to commit suicide before, one of these times when he threatened it. Mm-hmm. And he said he had wanted to all his life, except now he was happy. But he couldn't be happy because he was worried and he couldn't make her happy.
I don't know.
Okay, now there is some evidence that backs up her claims about the suicide.
Okay.
She had gone through some of his papers and pulled them out and gave them to investigators. In one of them, there was this will that he had written.
Yeah.
As a teenager.
Okay.
And it said, I will my car to Ab if he finishes it, my horse to Nancy, my money to Dick, my reputation to Virginia, my good looks to Mary. She needs it.
That almost sounds like a joke.
It kind of does. He did say, P.S. You might think I'm tight, but I'm not. P.S. Hope you don't feel hurt about this will.
That sounds like a joke.
It does, a teenager.
Yeah.
Then in another paper that he had written on the back of a receipt, and it was dated in 1927, so he would have been 16. Mm-hmm. My girl has turned me down. Goodbye forever. Give my love to Mary, Virginia, Nancy, Dick, etc. Goodbye, cruel world. Smith.
Okay, if you went through my papers as a teenager, you would have seen that and much more. And I was not suicidal.
Okay. And it does sound like maybe he's got a little flair for the dramatic.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. What teenager doesn't?
Right. Well, while those were written when he was a young, immature teenager, the most recent incident had happened over that very weekend as they were hanging out with their house guests. They were reading through the Reynolds family Bible. And on the page where it listed the details of Smith's birth and the date, he picked up a pen and added to it, he had written in there, and died of old age shortly after.
I mean, again, doesn't that kind of sound like a joke? He's not old.
Right. It does sound like he was kind of being funny, but
It sounds like he has a little bit of a dark sense of humor.
maybe. Well, Blanche Yurka, she witnessed that. She said that Libby looked worried when he did that. And she said, Smitty, I don't think you should have done that.
Okay, well, that's her acting coach. So she's going to probably go along with whatever she tells her.
Possibly.
I mean,
Or again, maybe she did say that, like you
that's
shouldn't
not
write that
funny.
in somebody's Bible. That's not a funny thing.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. Okay, so here are just a few other things that would make you raise your eyebrows a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Robert Critz is Smith's cousin.
Right.
He did testify that on the morning after the incident, when Ab was relating things to him, he said, Ab, tell me what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And Ab was telling him. He said that there was something he would take to his grave about that night.
Wow.
Now, that really hurt Ab's credibility.
Yeah.
When he was asked under oath why he had said that, he said he had no idea why he said that, and he would answer any question that they asked of him.
I bet he did. He had plenty of time to think about it.
Well, that mysterious comment did hang over him all of his life, but I'm going to say I read over 300 pages of that inquest testimony,
Oh, wow.
and I will say at the very end, on page 298,
Uh-huh.
Robert Critz actually testified, and I didn't see any of this in the papers,
Yeah.
but he actually testified that Ab told him what the thing was that he was going to keep under wraps.
Oh.
And they asked him, well, what was it? And he said that Smith had been threatening to commit suicide. Ab was trying to keep that from getting out because he didn't want Smitty to look bad. He was trying to protect his reputation. And he didn't want to tell that he had been threatening that. And I will say, I actually thought that was a little bit believable.
Yeah.
And we'll go into a little bit of that when we talk through our theories.
Okay.
There was another crazy theory that was thrown around, and this was actually in the coroner's inquest as well.
Mm-hmm.
There was this whole line of questioning about whether Smith knew Libby was a Jew. The theory was that maybe he had just found out about it and they had quarreled. They asked Ab, did you know Libby was a Jewess? And he didn't. Did Smith know? He said, I don't know what Smith knew. If Smith had told him that he just found out that she was a Jewess, no. If he knew Smith had any particular views about Jews, no, he did not. And then that line of questioning was
That's
dropped.
just weird.
That was weird. Later on, I forget who it was, but a family member did say that, of course, Smith knew she was a Jew, and they welcomed having some Jewish blood in their family.
Okay.
Well, after 3 days of testimony, the coroner's report determined that Smith had been killed by a person or persons unknown.
Oh, so now they're saying it's murder.
Less than a month later, a grand jury charged Libby Holman and Ab Walker with first-degree murder.
Okay, wow. Yeah.
And if found guilty, they would actually face the electric chair.
Wow.
Now, Libby's father is an attorney, and so
Okay.
they also got a lawyer from Winston-Salem.
Okay.
And Ab, he retained his uncle, an attorney, who was like with the state's oldest law firm. They say that both Ab and Libby were very keen to have a trial because they were both anxious to clear their names.
Okay.
During the investigation leading up to the whole after those charges were made, it brought a lot of intense scrutiny and a lot of personal details out about the lives of all of them, Libby, Ab, and Smith, and the Reynolds family. I mean, it was scandalous. Some of it, it's kind of sordid. It's all over the newspapers every day. And so eventually, Smith's uncle, William Neal, he ended up writing a letter to the state solicitor requesting that they drop the case.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
Now, he did say in that letter that he did not believe Smith would have committed suicide. He also did not believe there was enough evidence to prove that he was murdered.
Yeah. I
agree with that.
the uncle.
And the state solicitor agreed. And so the charges were dropped and there was never a trial.
Wow. Did they believe that Libby and Ab were telling the truth?
Well, this is what they said. His brother Dick said that probably the whole facts of what happened that night would never be known. And the uncle that wrote that letter, he said he never thought Ab Walker had a part in it, but maybe he had not told all that he knew. But he very much doubted Libby's story about the memory loss of the day in question.
Definitely agree with that.
I do too.
I wonder if he found out they were messing around. I mean, if he committed suicide, May found out they were messing around, or maybe she knew she was pregnant and didn't want to be with him.
Well, there's another theory
Okay.
that even though Smith could not inherit until he was 28, that once she found out she was pregnant, a baby could inherit on his death. And some people say it was financially motivated. But she and her people have said that's absolutely not true, that she was making plenty of money. She had more money than him, and she didn't need his money.
She had more money than him at the time, but let me tell you, people always want more money.
Especially if you have a lot.
Yes.
You always want more.
Exactly.
Well, now this could just be a flair for the dramatic on her part, but she said his family's money was always a problem, and she wished they never had it.
She wouldn't have been with him if he were poor.
Right.
Yeah.
The mystery of what happened to Smith Reynolds, whether it was suicide, accident, or murder, that's still a mystery today. But I'll tell you the aftermath. As in all things back then in North Carolina, unless you're 21,
Right.
you can't get married, you can't get a divorce, and you can't make your own will. Smith had made a will, but it wasn't really even a legal will because he wasn't 21 yet.
Right.
However, like we said, Libby was pregnant and her child would stand to inherit his father's estate. Libby gave birth to her baby in January of 1933. He was named Christopher Smith Reynolds, and he became known as Topper. That was like his nickname throughout his life. Cute, isn't it? After a few years of legal battles, the estate, which was worth more than $30 million, was divided this way.
So she went after the estate?
I don't know if she went after it, but the baby still stands. I mean,
Okay,
the baby
gotcha.
stands to inherit no matter whether you go after it or not.
Okay.
So 25% of it went to their son, Christopher.
Okay.
Half of the 75% that was left went to the first daughter, Anne.
Okay.
And the other half,
good.
yes, I'm glad she got that. And the other half went to his siblings. And Libby got $750,000 because
Okay.
she was technically married to him.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, she always maintained that money was never what she wanted, that she had her own money. Topper was co-parented growing up by a few of Libby's later love interests, including DuPont heiress Louisa Carpenter Jenny, Montgomery Clift, which is interesting because they were a couple, but later in years, I know he was known to be gay.
Yeah.
And many other actresses and actors.
Yes.
And then in 1939, she married her second husband, Ralph Holmes. Now, this is sad. When Topper was 17 years old, he was like his dad. He was an adventure seeker. So at 17 years old, he and a friend went rock climbing, the east face of Mount Whitney. 5 days into the climb, he and his friend went missing.
Oh.
So they did a search, and just a few days later, their bodies were found at the base of a 3,000-foot cliff, and his was kind of wedged in the crevice of a rock.
That is so sad.
That is tragic at 17.
Oh. How did she cope with that?
I'll tell you that.
Okay.
Just you got great questions because I'm glad that I've got answers to them. Actually, Libby went on to become a supporter of Martin Luther King, which is interesting. The day that we're recording this, yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, which we'll be publishing later. But anyway, she became a supporter of him. She became friends with him and his wife. They invited her to walk in marches with them.
Wow.
And after his assassination, Coretta and the kids took refuge at Libby's home for a while.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was interesting.
Wow.
However, you said how she took it. I'm sure that, if she didn't have anything to do with Smith's death, I'm sure that stuck with her whole life.
Sure.
And regardless of that, losing a son like that would be horrible.
Yeah.
So I don't know what her life was totally like, but I do know in 1971, she committed suicide. She was found in the front seat of her Rolls Royce, dead by carbon monoxide poisoning.
That is sad.
Yes, it is. She was 67 years old. Reynolds' daughter, Anne Cannon, she actually spent a good part of her childhood with her grandparents. I believe they were her guardians. And after the estate was settled and she inherited her part, the media many times would refer to her as the richest baby in the world. Unfortunately, due to that publicity, her family would receive letters in the mail. One said, "You're next." And it was actually referring to the Lindbergh baby situation. Her family hired Pinkerton agents to stay and protect her at all times.
Wow.
Whether she was asleep or playing in the yard, they had these agents.
There was definitely a target on rich
people.
kids back then. Or even, not even children all the time. I mean.
Right. And when she was 21, she actually was able to get her part, which was like $9 million.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
Smith's family, his siblings, they started the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation with their share, which is like a charitable organization. I actually went online and looked it up, and the website had a lot of stuff. I mean, it had a lot of information and talk that told you nothing about what they did and what they were for. Ab Walker, he never could shake the suspicion that was over him. He ended up moving away to Texas, where he lived for a good portion of his life. He eventually came back to North Carolina looking for treatment for lung cancer. They said he was a chain smoker, but he smoked Lucky Strikes, surreptitiously wrapped in camel packaging.
Wow.
I mean, if your best friend was the camel heir,
And smoking was cool back then.
Oh, yeah. It was very socially acceptable. I mean, yeah. But he did die from it at age 44.
Wow. Oh, my gosh. He must have been a chain smoker. That's young.
Yeah. I want to tell you 2 quotes from Libby later on that she said in her later life.
Okay.
She said, "It's a tragedy that a woman has to undergo so much before she realizes half the affection she feels for a man is maternal." And one other quote she made that I found very interesting was, "To tell the truth, I was so drunk that night, I don't know who shot him."
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
let's hear your theories. Tell me what you think.
So my theory is that I don't think he killed himself. But she wasn't convicted of murder, and Libby wasn't convicted of murder, and neither was Ab. And I just don't feel like it's the public's job to convict. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you just have to let people go on and live their lives at that point and believe that if justice wasn't met here, that it will be at some point. It does say, you just wonder, did she kill herself because
she carried that for that many years?
Yeah. And then, you would have to, if she did have something to do with it, you would have to wonder, like, when your kid died, is this a punishment? Everything that happens, I would think,
is this
that.
reaping what I've sown?
Exactly. But at the same time, I do think when people are acquitted or, if they're not found guilty, then we just have to let it go.
Yeah. So here's my theory.
Okay.
I don't think Ab had anything to do with it. I don't think she and Ab had anything going.
Okay.
I do think she was flirtatious.
Yeah.
I do think Smith was jealous. I feel like Ab was a loyal friend. And I think anything he tried to hide or cover up was probably to protect his friend's reputation.
Okay.
And I'm basing that on a lot of like I said, I read over 300 pages of the inquest. Just the way he answered things and the way he said, I'm just basing that on my opinion of how he answered stuff, which I don't know if I did a very good job of portraying to you, but I just don't feel like he had anything to do with it. I do think he may have thought Libby did.
Okay.
And maybe tried to help cover it up. Or he thought Libby didn't, and he didn't want her to get in trouble for something she didn't do.
Okay.
I do think he tried to help maybe cover something up like that to protect. I just feel like Ab was trying to protect Smith's reputation and the family's reputation. And the family feels like that too, I think.
Okay. So they didn't believe that he.
I don't think they believed it. Now, again, that's not to say Libby didn't do it. There was some obviously questionable ballistic evidence.
Yeah.
That just leaves. And she just had too convenient of a story that she doesn't remember anything.
That amnesia thing, when people say that, I automatically think they're guilty. If you hear my dogs in the background, I'm so sorry.
Darlene got a dog for Christmas and he's still in training.
Yes.
So with that said, this story was another reason I found it so, I guess, interesting was my daddy actually did commit suicide about 9 years ago, and that way he did shoot himself in the head. And so even researching this brought up a lot of, emotions for me.
I'm sure.
So with all of that said, I just want to put on here the suicide hotline.
Yes.
If anybody is struggling with that in the United States, you can dial 988. And I'll also have the Hopeline that you can call or text, and it's 877-235-4999. 64525. I will put those numbers in the show notes as well.
Okay. That's great and important. Don't think that you're alone.
Exactly.
Those sure were some hard times.
They sure were.
Now, people say smoking will kill you, that every cigarette is a nail in your coffin, but I don't know if I really believe that. When I was about 13, I did some yard work for a feller, and he paid me with a new pack of Camel Extra Wides. And coincidentally, 2 days after I smoked those Camel Extra Wides, I got pneumonia and almost died. But you know what they say, almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So I'd say it's a definite maybe at best. But it's a medically proven fact that every episode of Hard Times and True Crimes that you listen to will pull 2 of those nails back out. And I've heard it said that if you tell enough people to check out Hard Times and True Crimes, you'll be immortal until the day you die. Till next time, goodbye.